Hi, my name is Barb Nangle. I'm the founder of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. This is episode 24, Stinkin Thinkin. A popular saying in 12-Step Recovery is Stinkin Thinkin, which is meant to remind us that it's the thoughts in our heads that are bad. It's not us that's bad. And we can get rid of those thoughts. We need to switch from stinkin' thinking to purposely putting thoughts in our heads. And here's why. Our brain filters out things that don't seem relevant to us. So if we have a belief, then we're going to see things that don't fit with that belief as irrelevant and not pay attention to them. Before I go on, let me say that a belief is just a thought we think over and over and over again and internalize. It doesn't necessarily represent the truth. It's just a repetitive thought. For example, you've heard me use the phrase a number of times in this podcast that something, quote, just wasn't an option for me. Like reaching out for help was just not an option for me before recovery. That was a belief I had. It was not true. It felt true. It didn't feel like an option for me to reach out for help. But in reality, it was an option. I had the capability as a functioning human being to reach out and ask for help. But I had a belief that was so long-standing and deeply entrenched that it felt like the truth that I could not, in fact, reach out and ask for help. Now, I have a research background, so I know that there's a name for this idea that our brains filter things out that don't conform to our beliefs. And in research, it's called researcher bias. If a researcher believes something to be true, they're going to look for the evidence that upholds their belief system, and they're going to minimize, not notice, or discard the evidence that challenges their belief system. It doesn't matter how dedicated they are to their discipline, to science, or the scientific method. It happens to everyone. And if you know anything about research and running experiments, then you've heard of double-blind experiments, which are constructed specifically to guard against this type of thinking happening. That's how strong the influence of this bias we have towards upholding our beliefs is. Researchers had to come up with a method around that. Briefly, double-blind experiments are experiments where neither the researchers nor the participants know which participants are getting the experimental treatment and those that are not. And it's called double because it's both the researcher and the subject. And it's called blind because they don't know. They are blind to the conditions of the experiment and who is getting it. This is done to prevent researcher bias. That's how much of a problem personal bias is, that even people who are doing scientific research allow their beliefs to determine what to pay attention to and what they ignore. Experiments are much more likely to be accurate representations of the truth when they have a double-blind experiment setup. Anyway, the idea is that we have these beliefs about ourselves and the world, and we look for corroborating evidence. For example, one of the beliefs that I've had for a long time about myself is I'm too much. And what's interesting is that in completely different circumstances with completely different people, the conclusion that I have made about something that seems difficult for me or didn't come out the way I wanted it was because I'm too much. I decided that that was the reason, and I found the evidence to support that I'm too much. Now that I'm in recovery, I've learned to really see what's going on inside of me and to see my thought patterns. I can see that I have believed that and then looked for corroborating evidence that I'm too much for my entire life. You may recall from previous episodes that I've said that one of the really cool and interesting aspects of my recovery has been that I can look back in the past and realize that here's what I was doing, here's what I was thinking, and here's what my motives were. Even though I was completely blind to all those things at the time, I can see them with crystal clarity now. This is astonishing to me because clearly on some level, I knew what was going on at that time. Otherwise, how would I know it now? My experience of most people in recovery is that they're much more likely to think I'm a piece of shit, or I'm never going to recover, or everybody hates me, or nobody likes me, or I'm not worthy of love. All kinds of things that indicate a really, really horrible self-concept, really, really low self-esteem, which is the opposite of what I thought. But the principle still holds that we believed, or maybe even currently believe, things about ourselves that are simply not true. Then we look for evidence to support that belief. So I want to challenge you to start examining your thinking and pay attention to all the times and places that you see things that happen in the external world, whether they're just circumstances that involve complete strangers or people that you love, and you interpret those to mean the same thing every time, which could be, see, I am a piece of shit, or see, I don't deserve love, or see, nobody likes me, or I'm never going to recover, I'm not capable of recovering, and all that sort of thing. If you start hearing the same answer every single time as your explanation of what's going on, then that means you've definitely got some stinkin' thinking. And that thinking can change. The thing about your brain is its job is to think. You don't have to think the stuff that's been programmed in there, however. I was listening to a podcast recently, and this guy said something that fucking blew me away. I may have already mentioned it here, but it's worth mentioning again, even if I did say it before. He said, I talk to my brain more than I listen to my brain. Now, let me just pause for a moment to let that sink in. I talk to my brain more than I listen to my brain. So that guy understands what I've also come to understand as a result of my recovery, which is that I had this loop going on in my head that tells me I'm too much. Instead of listening to that now, I talk to myself all the time and tell myself good things. This is what affirmations are. And this is why I came up with the one in particular that I mentioned in episode 5 on affirming ourselves, which is, I am just the right amount of everything. For me, that affirmation is the antidote to I'm too much. I want to say something further about that, and that is that my thinking that I'm too much is really just the other side of the coin for those of you who think you're not enough. It's the same thing, just in a different direction. And that thing is, I'm not the right amount of whatever. I am a changed person as a result of my recovery. The riverbed of my life has been dug up and redirected. And a big part of that has been that I've challenged and changed my stinkin' thinking. That doesn't mean I don't have those thoughts anymore, but I have them way less than I used to. One of the things that I learned when I first came into recovery was I'm powerless over my first thought, but I'm not powerless over my second thought or what comes out of my mouth. So in other words, I may very well have that stinking thinking, but now that I can see it for what it is, I am responsible for the next thought and for what I do and for what I say after that. Now, when it occasionally still happens, I see that stinking thinking for what it is. Usually I can catch it in a couple of seconds, but every once in a while, I might go as much as an hour with stinking thinking. And then I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is me punishing myself with the old tapes. So I need to hit the eject button, ditch those tapes, and put in the new ones. Here's the thing, people. You were created on purpose. You were created on purpose, and you are not here to suffer. But no one is going to rescue you. No one is going to save you except for you. That means you have to do something. You have to act. And part of that action is challenging what's going on between your ears. That stinking thinking is just not serving you. You are just the right amount of everything. That's it for today. If you like what you've heard here, then you just might be interested in private coaching with me. If that sounds like you, head on over to my website, which is higherpowercoachingandconsulting.com, and click on the contact menu. I'd be happy to schedule a consultation with you to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change, but I'll coach anyone who wants to be happy, joyous, and free. So if that's you, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can be sure to get future episodes of my podcast. Thanks again.